Okay, so we are week 1, lecture 1, part 3. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about small businesses in the United States and basically give you a very brief overview of the number of small businesses that we have creating annually, or that are being created annually per year. Okay, so every year the Small Business Administration creates a presidential report, and it's available online. It's free. Anyone can access it, and they talk about entrepreneurship and what's happening with the small business climate in America, right? So if you look at, because of the Great Depression, which started, the Great Recession, I didn't mean to say that. That was sort of a hiccup. So the Great Recession of 2008. Because of the Great Recession, like I said earlier, lending practices have really changed for small businesses. And when lending practices change and you can't go get money to start a business, it becomes difficult for many, right? Because if they don't have assets that they could put up against the loan in case they fail, they're not going to be able to get a loan. Okay, so lenders tightened credit terms. They made it much more difficult for many individuals and most individuals to get loans. Because of that, other things emerged. So peer-to-peer lending sites, crowdfunding, like Kickstarters is probably one of the most famous ones that you guys probably have heard of, have emerged, where the crowd funds, they basically gift over or give money or loan money, depending on what sites you're on, for startup owners to get up off the ground. Okay, if you look at since 2008 into 2009, lending decreased 15%. Financial company lending decreased 20% across the board. So this caused many small business owners, because they couldn't go and get loans, to go elsewhere. And unfortunately, most people went to credit card debt. I mean, and that's just simply because it's readily available. Right? You have a credit card, you can go charge a couple grand, get up off the ground, try to get running with your business, another credit card will come in, you charge it again, and then before you know it, you're drowning. Right? So we're going to talk about funding in the future, in a couple of weeks in the future. But the point of the discussion is that lending has really tightened up and it's become very difficult. So if you look at the numbers of across the board, number of businesses that are starting and creating every year annually, they're actually quite high. That doesn't mean that they're successful. It doesn't mean that they actually got to first customer shipment. It doesn't mean that they actually got to market. It just means that somebody somewhere filled out the paperwork and filed it with the Secretary of State, most often, unless there's sole proprietorship, and basically tried to get their business going, or are sitting on it still. Okay, so unincorporated self-employment. If you look at, and again, the numbers from 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, they're all pretty similar. Okay, unincorporated self, meaning that you're probably a sole proprietor. You're not incorporated, meaning you're not a C Corp or an S Corp or LLC. You would be a sole proprietor or a partnership or a limited partnership, which we're going to talk about later on. We have a little less than 10 million businesses starting annually per year. So 9.8, I'm sorry, million. I don't know if I said billion, but I meant million. 9.8 million businesses that are unincorporated starting annually. Okay, now incorporated, meaning C, S, or LLCs, we're having less than 6 million, so about 5.5 million. So if you add those two together, we have around 15.5 million businesses in the United States starting every year. Now again, that doesn't mean that they're actually successful. Doesn't mean that they ever get to first customer shipment. It doesn't mean that they've done a single dollar of sales. It just means they filed the paperwork and have moved forward. Okay, so small businesses, the definition of a small business. When I ask students this, I get all kinds of answers. I have students that say a small business is 10 people or less, 15 people or less, 20 people or less working for the business. That's actually, it is true. Those are actually more micro enterprises, but the actual definition of a small business is 500 employees or less. And 500 to me is pretty dang big. Right? But that's a classification. So when you look at Small Business Administration, when they're classifying small businesses, that means that they have 500 employees or less. Now, if you look at that versus large corporations, 99% of all businesses in the United States are classified as small businesses. There is less than 0.3% that are actually considered large corporations. So in a nutshell, around a little less than 20,000 large corporations exist here in the United States. So if you run the statistics when you graduate, if you're in business and management, if you're going to go and work for a business, and even if you're not, if you're going to go and work for someone, statistically speaking, the chances of you actually working for a small business are significantly greater than you working for a large corporation here in the United States today. Okay, small businesses provide 75% of all new jobs to the United States, and they are adding more and more jobs to the United States than large corporations. Okay, half of the private sector's workforce is employed, and actually that's closer towards 70%. Every year we're seeing it change and go higher and higher. We have more innovation in small businesses compared to large corporations, so they're able to change quicker. They're able to shift compared to large corporations, and I think simply because there's less people. So you'll have less bureaucracy, less red tape, because if you're running a business that has 50 people, 100 people versus several thousand people, you're going to have more layers with the more number of people, so you can organize and you can regulate and you can be efficient. Okay. So again, small businesses, 99% of the businesses in our country, and again, they are able to change and shift and meet demands based on what customers want because they're smaller and they're able to be more innovative than large businesses. And large businesses tend to buy innovative ideas from the small businesses because it's cheaper for them to do that than to try to create it on their own. And there'll be a case, Vermeer, which will show you that with Microsoft. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about minority small business stats specifically. So if you look at minority-owned businesses, there are 4.1 million firms in the United States that generate almost $700 million in revenue, okay, per year. They have 5 million workers, so 4 million businesses that are minority-owned. They generate almost $700 million in sales, and they have almost 5 million people that they are employing. Workers. Hispanics own 10% of all the businesses, of the minority-owned businesses. If you look at, there are almost 800,000 companies in the United States that are located in the poorest regions of the United States. And that would be in the top 100 largest cities in the U.S. Okay, women-owned businesses tend to make a lot of money for our country. We tend to make upwards towards $1 trillion per year in annual revenue, and they employ almost close to 10 million workers, right? So women-owned businesses have really changed a lot, and the space has changed over the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years. There's been a lot of debates. I was on this PBS sort of discussion panel thing last semester where we were talking about corporate America and the fact that there's not as many CEOs and women that were in the executive C-suites, and why is that? And I basically was representing entrepreneurship, and my thought is, as a woman, to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, right? You're working 100 hours plus per week, you're never home, you travel quite a bit. If I have to weigh that between being at home and running my own business, even though it's smaller, I might want to have a different path than being a CEO of a top company. And so there's been a lot of debates and research as to that. And what we're seeing is that women are opting out of corporate America and opting into entrepreneurship because you have more flexibility, you have more freedom, you can dictate your own schedule, especially if you have children. I have 2 kids. Child rearing is problematic sometimes because they get sick, like in the worst possible times, and so that doesn't necessarily help you if you're needing to go to a meeting in Portland, Oregon, and you have to be there regardless of whether your kid is sick or not. So I think that there's more and more research showing that women are opting out in a way, and they're moving into entrepreneurship, and so we're seeing a lot more women starting ventures, which is a good thing, actually. We're also seeing a lot of immigrants, and we have historically seen immigrants become entrepreneurs, so almost 20% of the startups are coming from immigrants in the United States. And I think we're going to see more and more of that because our population size is changing. We're supposed to be upwards towards 350 million people in America, and that's not from us going and having babies, that's from a lot of immigrants coming into our country. So I think that because we have a lot of freedom and we have opportunities here, people are jumping at that, especially if they come from countries where they've been stifled, and starting a business, whether it's a sausage store or a little kiosk or it's a high-growth computer software engineering company. I think that a lot of the immigrants are grateful for these opportunities, and they're coming and creating ventures because of that. Okay, so unfortunately, when you look at stats for minority-owned businesses tend to close more readily than non-minority-owned. So the failure rates are higher for minority-owned businesses. There's different reasons why. Research will show. Some of them are inconclusive. Women-owned businesses, which I said before, are exploding. We're seeing more and more. We're starting to increase our pace in creating our ventures. So if you look at out of 1,000 women in the U.S., 50 towards 60, some of the newer stats are starting businesses. So if you look at that compared to men, for every 1,000 men, 98 men are starting businesses. For every 1,000 women, we've got 60 women who are starting businesses. So it's not statistically huge, but it's still pretty dang good. And we're seeing more and more of that. If you look at female-owned establishments, we are outpacing male establishments in 40 out of 50 states. So that's a good sign and a healthy sign of the economy. Okay, and so that's sort of where we are as far as small business goes. So almost 16 million per year that are creating unincorporated, incorporated across the board. Minorities-owned businesses are increasing. They tend to fail more often than non-minority-owned. Female-owned businesses are starting to increase, and we're seeing some movement in the space, and that's continuing to increase. And so now I'm going to move forward and talk about other things in the next lecture series. So that's it.